Hi, this is Paolo De Buono with a message to my TCDSB teacher colleagues. Pride Month is coming in just a few days, and at a time when we are expected and we ought to be planning uh, to us LGBTQ plus inclusive lessons, as we should all year, but Pride is an extra opportunity to do so. I want to remind you that the resources that our school board provides us today, and today is May 25, 2022, the resources are quite limited. They're limited compared to other areas, other equity areas like anti racism, um, and they are far behind where we could have been today had there not been a significant history and impact of our systemic homophobia and transphobia. I want to remind you that just 2 years ago, we believed it was wrong to celebrate Pride Month and fly a pride flag. There was a senior manager who's no longer with us, who had retired, who admitted that he would have decided today, then 2 years ago, as he did a few years ago, in a survey of high school students, not to include questions about sexual orientation or gender identity because such questions went against Catholic values. Again, that was just a few years ago, 2 years ago, that our system believed that. Again, and look at my example where I was attacked in the media just over 2 years ago because I used an inclusive book in my grade 5 and 6 class. We have a history of systemic homophobia, and it doesn't just disappear because we're flying a pride flag. That means we were so far behind, and we obviously have not caught up to where we could have been had there not been such a problem. That means that you and I have an extra responsibility in this area to do what we can ourselves to be inclusive in our classrooms. We tend to rely on our school board, and we ought to start there. We could start there and see what they have, as you would in other areas like anti-racism, um, anti-Asian racism. As for example, there's a great link to suggested books, training in anti-racism activities that are clearly focused on addressing that topic as best as it can. Of course, it's not enough. There's never really enough spending in equity, but there is something there to suggest that you have enough to get started, and obviously you do what you can to make up the difference. But in the area of 2S LGBTQ plus inclusion, we are so far behind because of that systemic homophobia from the past, so that it's hard to get started if your plan is to rely on what's provided internally. Then you're professionally at a loss because there's not much there. And so that's why I'm just sharing this message as an extra reminder to you and I that we have to work extra in this area to do some of our own PD, read our own resources, maybe look to other school boards, organizations that provide resources for us, for our students. I am going to share briefly our website, the ARC website, and I'll start from the home. And again, just to show you that there's very little here. In the home section, resources, there, oh look, Pride of the TCDSB, but that's from last year. Not much there. Voices from the community section. Staff voice, you know, and I know that there are no openly 2S LGBTQ plus principals, vice principals, or superintendents in our school board. There's really no staff voice. Connections and conversations. There was that program last year. A 2-hour discussion is not enough. Student voice. I don't see much in the area of anti-homophobia. Maybe it'll come, but it's not there for you now to rely on. It's May 25. Teacher PD and resources, There's really no PD in this area. There were some resources briefly shared for these days. You'll notice again, it rarely refers to terms like gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer. We ought to be more comfortable with those words. They're inclusive words, they're good words. Students are looking for us to use them. And by not using them, we're not being inclusive. Teacher resources and documents, again, very little there. Again, there's some things to help us in other areas, so little in the area of 2S LGBTQ plus inclusion. Professional development. Be honest. When was the last time you were invited to a really good professional development opportunity in this area within our school board? I've never been. And I look for those things all the time. Projects, equity PD, other areas, book clubs, sounds great. You notice there's never been a discussion of a book that goes into detail in education in the area of 2S LGBTQ plus inclusion. It's not really there. Developing community, let's check this section. 2S LGBTQ plus community. There are resources in other areas, and if you go into them, you'll see they're much more extensive than this area. Again, very limited. The internal stuff, the internal information is very limited. We're always pointed to external resources, and that's always quite limited. Who's modeling in our school board for us how to be inclusive to a primary class in this area, or a junior class, or an intermediate class, and so on? I don't see it. It's not here. There are some external resources here. These are really good resources. But again, nothing internal to help guide us, to get us started. There's very little here. And thanks for spending those extra few minutes here to watch that resource. It's a good resource. I go to it and I use it for other areas. But I know in the area of 2S LGBTQ plus inclusion, it's extremely limited by comparison. And I understand, because we've had such a problem in the past with systemic homophobia and transphobia. And because it was a significant problem in the past, it doesn't just disappear because we are flying a pride flag now. It's still there. And it shows from the lack of resources and in other ways. So I hope that helps to remind you that there is a challenge in this area, an extra challenge in this equity area compared to other equity areas, where the extra challenge means that you and I have a responsibility to go beyond the little that's provided to us by our school board in this area. We have an obligation, a responsibility professionally to find the resources, learn what we can, and to be inclusive, because our 2S LGBTQ plus students deserve, as a right, because learning is important, they deserve to be reflected in the curriculum and the activities in their schools and classrooms.